For 9 years, I believed that love wasn't measured by expensive gifts or romantic vacations. I believed love was measured by sacrifice. I believed that when you truly loved someone, you carried them through the hardest years of their life without keeping score. You worked the extra shifts. You skipped the little luxuries. You ignored your own exhaustion because someday, when the struggle was over, you'd both be standing at the finish line together. My name is Olivia Carter. That's what I believed. But before I tell you what happened next, welcome to Revenge Stories with Rinsula, the home of unforgettable stories of betrayal, karma, redemption, and justice. If you enjoy emotional revenge stories where the truth always comes out and karma never forgets, you'll feel right at home here. Please take a second to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. And if this story touches you, don't forget to share it with someone and leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Now, let me tell you how the man I sacrificed 9 years of my life for threw everything away, and why he eventually wished he never had. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't building our future. I was building his. And the moment he finally reached the top, he looked down at me and decided I no longer belonged beside him. For nearly a decade, my life followed the same routine in Chicago. At 5 every morning, my alarm would scream through our tiny apartment before the sun came up. I'd quietly slip out of bed so I wouldn't wake Daniel. He needed his sleep. He had anatomy exams, clinical rotations, and endless lectures waiting for him. I'd make him breakfast, pack his lunch, leave a handwritten note reminding him how proud I was of him. Then I'd drive across the city to the hospital cafeteria where I spent my mornings serving breakfast to doctors, nurses, and medical students. By 1 in the afternoon, I'd change into another uniform and head downtown to clean office buildings after executives finished their workday. When that shift ended, I'd grab a cheap sandwich from a gas station, drink another cup of coffee, and report to my third job stocking grocery shelves until nearly 3 in the morning. Then I'd go home, sleep for a few hours, and do it all over again. Every single day. People would look at the dark circles under my eyes and ask if I was okay. I'd laugh. I'm fine, I'd tell them. When Daniel becomes a surgeon, all of this will be worth it. I said those words so often that I started believing they were a promise instead of a prayer. Every paycheck disappeared before I even had the chance to enjoy earning it. Medical school tuition, exam fees, rent, electricity, gas, books that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. When Daniel worried about money, I told him not to. I'll figure it out. And somehow, I always did. I sold jewelry my grandmother left me. I drove the same old Honda until the air conditioning stopped working. I wore the same winter coat for 6 years because replacing it felt selfish. I skipped dentist appointments, ignored back pain, put off every dream I had because his dream mattered more. Or at least, I thought it did. Finally, after 9 years of sacrifice, graduation day arrived. The auditorium was packed with cheering families, proud parents, children waving homemade signs, couples embracing each other. I sat quietly in the front row wearing a navy blue dress I'd owned for years. It wasn't new. I couldn't afford new. But I didn't care. Watching Daniel walk across that stage in his cap and gown filled me with a pride I can't even describe. The entire room applauded. I cried harder than anyone else. Because no one there understood what that diploma had really cost. I did. Every sleepless night. Every aching muscle. Every missed birthday, every overtime shift. Every dream I buried. When Daniel hugged me after the ceremony, he whispered, "We finally made it." I smiled through my tears. I knew you would. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a different future. Maybe we'd finally take a vacation. Maybe we'd buy a small house. Maybe I'd quit working 3 jobs. Maybe, just maybe, it was finally my turn to breathe. 3 weeks later. Daniel came home early. He wasn't carrying groceries. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't wearing the wedding ring I'd watched him put on every morning for nearly a decade. Instead, he walked into the kitchen holding a manila envelope. Without saying a word, he placed it on the table between us. It was barely a whisper. "There has to be some mistake." "There isn't," Daniel answered. His voice sounded calm. Practiced. As though he'd rehearsed this conversation in his head dozens of times. I looked at him, waiting for him to explain. Waiting for him to say he was overwhelmed. Waiting for him to tell me this was temporary. Instead, he crossed his arms and said the sentence that still echoes in my head years later. "I deserve someone who matches the life I built." For a moment, I couldn't even process what he'd said. "The life you built?" I repeated. "You mean, our life?" He sighed as if I were making this difficult. "We've grown into different people." "No. You've stayed the same while I've moved forward." Then he told me the truth. There was someone else. A 24-year-old medical intern he'd met during his residency. Young. Beautiful. Ambitious. Someone who understood the world he lived in now. Someone he believed belonged beside a successful surgeon. Not the exhausted woman who had spent 9 years making sure he became one. By the time he walked out the front door that evening, everything I'd built was gone. My marriage. My home. My future. The life I'd sacrificed almost a decade to create. Daniel believed he was walking away from a woman who had nothing left to offer. He had no idea. He had just created the woman who would eventually destroy everything he'd built. People always ask me if there were warning signs. If I ignored obvious red flags. If Daniel had always been selfish. The truth is, the man I married wasn't the same man who handed me those divorce papers. At least, that's what I believed for a very long time. 9 years earlier, I met Daniel at a neighborhood coffee shop on the north side of Chicago. I had stopped in before work for my usual black coffee. He was sitting alone near the window, surrounded by biology textbooks, handwritten notes, and an empty wallet lying open on the table while he counted change to buy another cup of coffee. The cashier quietly told him he was short. Without thinking, I stepped forward. "I've got it." He looked embarrassed. "You don't have to do that. It's just coffee." He smiled. "I'll pay you back." I laughed. "Then I guess we'll have to meet again." That simple conversation turned into another one. Then another. Before long, we were spending every weekend together. Daniel wasn't wealthy. He wasn't polished. He didn't drive a fancy car. What he had was ambition. He talked endlessly about becoming a surgeon. Not because of the money. At least, that's what he told me. His father had died waiting for emergency surgery when Daniel was just 16 years old. He said no family should ever experience that kind of helplessness. Every time he talked about medicine, his eyes lit up. I believed every word. I fell in love with the kindness I saw in him. Or perhaps, the kindness I wanted to believe was there. 2 years later, he proposed during a walk along the Chicago River. There was no expensive restaurant. No violin music. No photographer hiding in the bushes. Just Daniel, nervously holding a small ring he admitted he'd spent months saving to buy. "I can't promise you an easy life," he said. "But I promise that every sacrifice we make now will be worth it." I never cared about money. I cared about us. So I said yes without hesitation. A few months after our wedding, the acceptance letter arrived. Daniel had been admitted to one of Chicago's most respected medical schools. We celebrated with takeout pizza because that was all we could afford. After dinner, reality settled in. Tuition was overwhelming. Books alone cost thousands of dollars. Clinical equipment. Licensing exams. Rent. Insurance. Living expenses. Everything suddenly felt impossible. Daniel looked defeated. I should wait a few years. What? I'll save money first. You've worked too hard to wait. We can't afford this. I reached across the table and took his hand. We'll figure it out. He shook his head. No, you don't understand how expensive this is. I don't care. You'll have to sacrifice everything. I smiled. Then we'll sacrifice everything. Tears filled his eyes. I swear to you, Liv, one day I'll spend the rest of my life paying you back. I squeezed his hand. You don't have to pay me back. We're building this together. Looking back now, those words break my heart more than the divorce papers ever did. Because when I said them, I truly believed they would always be true. The first year of medical school wasn't glamorous. There were no inspiring movie moments. No dramatic montages where hard work magically solved every problem. There was just exhaustion. Every morning, I woke up before 5. I brewed a pot of coffee, packed Daniel's lunch, and left little notes inside his backpack. Good luck on your anatomy exam. You've got this. I'm proud of you. Sometimes, when I got home after midnight, I'd find those notes tucked back onto the kitchen counter. He kept every one of them. Back then, I thought that meant something. My days blurred together. I spent the mornings working in the hospital cafeteria, where I learned many of the regular doctors' coffee orders before I ever learned their names. By early afternoon I was downtown cleaning office buildings, pushing a cart through polished hallways that emptied after business hours. Late at night, I stocked shelves at a grocery store until my feet throbbed so badly that taking off my shoes felt like a reward. Some nights, I'd sit alone in my car for 5 minutes before driving home because I was too tired to trust myself behind the wheel. Money disappeared as quickly as I earned it. Every semester brought another tuition payment. Another stack of textbooks. Another licensing fee. Whenever Daniel apologized for the cost, I'd kiss his forehead and tell him not to worry. We're investing in our future. That's what I honestly believed. To make ends meet, I quietly began giving up pieces of my own life. The necklace my grandmother had left me was the first thing I sold. Daniel never knew. When my old Honda needed repairs, I learned how to take the bus between jobs rather than spend money fixing it immediately. My winter coat developed a tear under one sleeve. Instead of replacing it, I stitched it closed myself. Friends stopped inviting me to dinners because I always said no. Family holidays became impossible. Every invitation was answered with the same sentence. I have to work. At first, Daniel noticed. You haven't seen your sister in months. I know. You should take a day off. We can't afford for me to. He'd hug me and whisper, one day I'll make all of this up to you. I held on to those words like they were a promise. But as the years passed, something inside him slowly began to change. Medical school transformed him. He became more confident. More polished. More certain of himself. At first, I was proud. Then I noticed little things. When people complimented his success, he smiled without mentioning everything we'd sacrificed to get there. If someone asked what I did for a living, he'd answer before I could. She works a few jobs. A few jobs. As if that explained everything. As if those jobs weren't carrying both of us. The thank yous became less frequent. The hugs became shorter. The conversations became rushed. Whenever I tried telling him how exhausted I felt, he'd barely look up from his laptop. I've got an exam tomorrow. I know. We'll talk later. Later almost never came. I convinced myself it was temporary. Medical school was stressful. Residency would be different. Once life settled down, we'd find each other again. I kept believing that because the alternative was too painful to consider. Looking back now, I realize something important. Love doesn't usually disappear overnight. Sometimes it fades so slowly that you don't notice it's gone until you're standing in the dark. And by then, you're the only one still trying to keep the light on. When Daniel started his residency, our world stopped moving in the same direction. For years, we'd lived almost identical lives. Long hours. Financial stress. Constant sacrifice. Now his life was changing faster than either of us expected. He spent his days surrounded by accomplished physicians, respected specialists, and ambitious young doctors who talked about fellowships, research grants, luxury condos, and investment portfolios. The hospital became his entire world. At first, I loved hearing his stories. He'd tell me about difficult surgeries he'd observed or the attending physician who praised his quick thinking. I'd listen with genuine excitement. "See?" I'd tell him. "I always knew you'd make it." But gradually, our conversations changed. Instead of sharing his day, Daniel started correcting mine. One evening, after I'd rushed home from work to surprise him with his favorite homemade lasagna, he glanced around our apartment and frowned. "We really need to upgrade this place." I laughed. "We will. You're just starting residency." "No," he said. "I mean soon." He looked at our worn sofa. "Our colleagues live differently." Our colleagues. The words caught my attention. Not my coworkers. Not the residents. Our colleagues. It was as though he had already placed himself in a new social class, and quietly decided I no longer belonged there. Hospital dinners became more frequent. Residency networking events filled his calendar. At first, he always invited me. I bought the nicest dress I owned, curled my hair, and did my best to fit in. But I immediately noticed the difference. The conversations revolved around prestigious medical schools, expensive vacations, golf clubs, and family connections. The other spouses were attorneys, pharmacists, consultants, and executives. When someone asked what I did, I smiled. "I work 3 jobs." For a brief second, the table went silent. Then someone politely changed the subject. On the drive home, I tried to laugh it off. "Well, that was awkward." Daniel didn't laugh. "You don't have to tell people that." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "It just sounds." He hesitated. "Less impressive." His words landed harder than he realized. "Those jobs paid for medical school." "I know. I'm just saying first impressions matter." I stared out the passenger window for the rest of the drive. It was the first time I felt embarrassed. Not of myself. Of the man sitting beside me. After that night, Daniel stopped inviting me to many hospital events. "There isn't enough room. It's mostly residents. You'd probably be bored." I believed him. Or maybe I wanted to believe him. Then the late nights became routine. He blamed emergency surgeries. Unexpected cases. Additional training. The explanations always sounded reasonable. Medicine demanded long hours. I understood that better than most. Still, something felt different. His phone was always face down. He smiled at messages he never shared. He bought expensive cologne he'd never worn before. He suddenly cared about designer suits and luxury watches. One Saturday morning, while folding laundry, I found a restaurant receipt tucked inside his jacket pocket. Graduation should have been the happiest day of our marriage. For nearly 9 years, that moment had existed only in my imagination. Whenever I felt like giving up, I pictured Daniel walking across that stage in a white coat, smiling at me from the podium. That image had carried me through thousands of hours of overtime and more sleepless nights than I could count. When the day finally arrived, the auditorium was overflowing with proud families. Parents held bouquets of flowers. Children waved homemade signs. Cameras flashed every few seconds. I sat quietly in the front row, my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying not to cry before the ceremony even began. Daniel found me in the crowd before the graduates marched in. He smiled. For just a second. I saw the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The ceremony seemed to last forever. Then his name echoed through the auditorium. Daniel Carter. The entire room erupted into applause. As he walked across the stage to receive his medical degree, tears streamed down my face. No one around me knew why I was crying so hard. They saw a proud wife. I saw every overnight shift. Every unpaid bill. Every birthday I'd missed. Every dream I'd postponed. Every sacrifice wrapped into one piece of paper. After the ceremony, Daniel hugged me tightly. "We did it," he whispered. I buried my face against his shoulder. "No," I said through happy tears. "You did it." He pulled back and smiled. "We couldn't have done this without you." Those words became the last beautiful lie he ever told me. 3 weeks later, everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening. I had just finished cooking spaghetti because it was inexpensive and happened to be Daniel's favorite meal. The pasta had been sitting on the stove for almost an hour when I finally heard the front door open. "You're home," I called. No answer. I walked into the living room and immediately noticed something strange. Daniel wasn't carrying his laptop. He wasn't loosening his tie. He wasn't even looking at me. Instead, he carried a plain manila envelope. Without saying a word, he placed it on the kitchen table. Something inside me instantly tightened. "What is this?" He took a slow breath. "You should read it." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. The first page stole the air from my lungs. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I blinked several times, convinced I had misunderstood what I was reading. Then I looked at him. "Daniel." My voice barely existed. "This isn't funny. I'm not joking. There has to be some mistake." "There isn't." I searched his face for emotion. Regret. Fear. Anything. There was nothing. Just cold certainty. "Why?" I whispered. He rubbed the bridge of his nose as though he were preparing for an uncomfortable business meeting. "We've become different people." "What does that even mean?" "It means my life is changing. Our life is changing." He shook his head. "No. My life." The word hit harder than I expected. My. Not ours. Mine. His. I stared at him in disbelief. "I worked 3 jobs for almost a decade so you could become a doctor." "I know. You promised we'd finally have our future." I meant it at the time. At the time. Those 4 words shattered something inside me. Then he said the sentence that would replay in my head for years. "I deserve someone who matches the life I built." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because my mind couldn't accept that the man standing in front of me believed those words. "The life you built?" I repeated. "I worked 3 jobs while you studied. I paid your tuition. I paid our rent. I paid for your books. I packed your lunches. I believed in you when nobody else could. And you're telling me you built this?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "This isn't helping." "No." I nodded slowly. "It isn't." Then he delivered the final blow. "There is someone else." The room began spinning. "Who?" "A resident?" He shook his head. "A medical intern." "How old?" He hesitated. 24. 24. I was 34. I suddenly understood everything. The late nights. The expensive restaurants. The cologne. The distance. He hadn't changed overnight. He had simply stopped pretending. By the time he walked out the front door carrying 2 suitcases, my marriage had already been over for months. I just hadn't known it. The first night after Daniel left was the quietest night of my life. Silence can be louder than screaming. Every room in our apartment reminded me of something we'd built together. The coffee mugs we'd bought on our honeymoon. The sofa we'd found at a thrift store because it was all we could afford. The tiny kitchen where I'd packed thousands of lunches while Daniel studied. None of it felt like home anymore. A week later, the apartment was gone too. Since Daniel had already signed a lease for a luxury condo near the hospital, keeping our place made no financial sense. I packed 9 years of memories into cardboard boxes. Everything I owned fit inside the back of a rented moving truck. I found a tiny studio apartment on the northwest side of Chicago. The rent was cheap. The building was old. The walls were so thin I could hear my neighbors arguing every night. There wasn't enough room for most of my furniture, so I sold nearly everything. The first few weeks, I slept on an air mattress because buying a Real bed felt impossible. Every morning, I woke up expecting to hear Daniel getting ready for work. Then reality hit me all over again. Friends called less often than I expected. Some didn't know what to say. Others quietly disappeared. A few had become closer to Daniel through the hospital. Taking sides was easier than staying neutral. The loneliness was crushing. Then came social media. I made the mistake of opening Instagram one Saturday morning. There they were. Daniel and the intern. Smiling on a rooftop overlooking Lake Michigan. Holding champagne glasses. Vacation photos from Miami. Dinner at restaurants we'd never been able to afford. Designer clothes. Luxury hotels. Every picture felt like another reminder that the life I'd paid for was now being enjoyed by someone else. I closed my phone and cried harder than I ever had before. Not because I wanted Daniel back. But because I couldn't understand how someone could erase 9 years so easily. For weeks, I went through the motions. Work. Sleep. Repeat. I wasn't living. I was surviving. Then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, while organizing old paperwork for tax season, I found one of my notebooks from years earlier. Inside were handwritten budgets I'd created during Daniel's first year of medical school. Every dollar was accounted for. Every bill. Every tuition payment. Every grocery list. Every overtime shift. As I flipped through the pages, a strange realization settled over me. I hadn't just supported Daniel. I'd managed an entire household under impossible circumstances. I'd coordinated schedules between 3 employers. Negotiated payment plans. Solved financial crises. Balanced budgets with almost nothing. I'd spent nearly a decade running our lives like a business. For the first time since the divorce, I asked myself a different question. Instead of asking, why wasn't I enough? I asked, what if everything I learned helping Daniel succeed could finally be used to build something for myself? That single thought didn't erase the pain. It didn't stop the loneliness. But it gave me something I'd been missing ever since Daniel walked away. Hope. And although I couldn't see it yet, that tiny spark of hope would eventually become the beginning of everything Daniel believed I'd never accomplish without him. Graduation should have been the happiest day of our marriage. People think healing happens all at once. It doesn't. Healing happened for me in tiny moments. The first morning I made my bed instead of lying in it all day. The first time I cooked a real meal instead of eating instant noodles over the sink. The first night I slept 6 straight hours without waking up wondering where Daniel was. None of those moments felt extraordinary. But together, they became the beginning of my new life. One evening after work, I sat at my tiny kitchen table surrounded by notebooks, old calendars, and folders I'd saved from the years Daniel was in medical school. As I flipped through them, I realized something. For almost a decade, I hadn't simply been supporting a husband. I'd been managing an incredibly complicated operation. 3 work schedules. Tuition deadlines. Rent. Insurance. Medical licensing fees. Tax records. Loan payments. Emergency expenses. I had coordinated everything without ever missing a payment. Somehow, I'd kept our entire life from falling apart. A thought crossed my mind. What if those weren't just survival skills? What if they were business skills? The next day, I signed up for evening classes in business management at a local community college. It felt strange walking into a classroom at 34. Most of my classmates were years younger than me. At first, I wondered if I was wasting my time. Then I remembered something Daniel had once told me. "You're the most organized person I've ever met." Back then, I had taken it as a compliment. Now I realized it was something more. Organization solves problems. And hospitals had plenty of problems. During one of my classes, a professor discussed staffing shortages across the healthcare industry. Hospitals were struggling to find experienced nurses, technicians, and support staff. Some departments were operating dangerously understaffed. The idea stayed with me. A few days later, I visited the hospital cafeteria where I'd worked for years. Several of my former coworkers were still there. As we talked, one nurse sighed. "We're desperate for staff. People keep leaving faster than we can replace them." Another added, "Every hospital in Chicago seems to have the same problem." Something clicked. I went home and spent the entire weekend researching healthcare staffing agencies. By Monday morning, I had filled an entire notebook with ideas. I wasn't trying to become rich. I simply wanted to solve a problem. Using the little savings I'd managed to rebuild, I registered a small business. The office was nothing glamorous. Just a rented room above an insurance agency with second-hand furniture and a laptop I'd bought on sale. I answered my own phones. Designed my own website. Delivered paperwork myself. Some days, I questioned whether I was completely out of my mind. Other days, I landed another client. 1 became 3. 3 became 8. 8 became 20. Word spread quickly. Hospital administrators appreciated that I understood healthcare from the inside. I knew their schedules. Their pressure. Their staffing emergencies. I spoke their language because I'd spent years living around it. Within 3 years, my tiny company had grown into one of Chicago's fastest-growing healthcare staffing firms. I hired employees. Leased a real office overlooking downtown. Bought my first new car. Then, one Saturday afternoon, I stood inside a beautiful condominium overlooking Lake Michigan. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows. The realtor smiled. "What do you think?" I slowly walked across the empty living room. For years, I'd imagined buying a home with Daniel. Instead, I signed the paperwork alone. And somehow, that felt even more satisfying. Not because I wanted revenge. Because everything around me had been earned by my own determination. For the first time in my adult life, every success belonged entirely to me. People often assume karma arrives like lightning. Instant. Loud. Spectacular. The truth is much quieter. It arrives one consequence at a time. Almost 2 years after launching my company, I attended a healthcare leadership conference in downtown Chicago. Hospital executives. Medical directors. Business owners. The ballroom buzzed with conversations about staffing shortages, technology, and the future of healthcare. During a networking reception, I overheard 2 physicians talking. "Did you hear about Daniel Carter?" My heart skipped for just a moment. I hadn't heard his name in months. The other doctor nodded. "I heard he's having a rough time." Apparently, Daniel's relationship with the 24-year-old intern hadn't lasted. According to the rumors, once the excitement of secret romance disappeared, so did their relationship. She transferred to another residency program. Daniel stayed behind. Alone. But that wasn't the only problem. Several nurses had filed complaints about his attitude. Residents described him as arrogant. Patients had begun requesting different physicians after difficult interactions. None of it was catastrophic. Yet. But reputations inside hospitals travel quickly. Especially negative ones. Over the following year, bits of information reached me through professional contacts. Daniel had lost an opportunity to become department chief. Another surgeon had been selected instead. A prestigious fellowship application had been rejected. Several colleagues he'd once considered friends kept their distance. The same confidence that had impressed people early in his career had slowly turned into arrogance. Meanwhile, my own calendar looked completely different. Our company signed contracts with hospitals throughout Illinois. Then Wisconsin. Then Indiana. We expanded faster than I had ever imagined. One afternoon, my operations director walked into my office carrying a stack of contracts. "Congratulations," she said. "We specialized in helping hospitals fill critical staffing shortages with experienced nurses, technicians, and support professionals." Ironically, the organizational skills I'd developed while juggling 3 jobs and managing Daniel's medical school expenses had become the foundation of my business. Every crisis I'd solved back then had prepared me for this. Every sacrifice had taught me resilience. One Monday morning, my executive assistant knocked gently on my office door. "Olivia? Come in." She handed me a folder. "North Lake Medical Center wants to schedule a contract negotiation. Their surgical department is facing staffing shortages." I opened the folder without thinking. Then I froze. The name listed under department director made my heart stop for a second. Dr. Daniel Carter. I stared at the page. Life has a strange sense of timing. I hadn't seen Daniel in almost 3 years. Occasionally I'd hear bits of news through mutual acquaintances. His relationship with the young intern had ended less than a year after our divorce. Hospital gossip suggested she'd transferred to another residency program after things turned ugly. I'd also heard whispers that Daniel's reputation had suffered. Several colleagues described him as brilliant but increasingly difficult to work with. His arrogance had earned him more than a few enemies. Still, seeing his name in front of me stirred emotions I thought I'd left behind. Not love. Not anger. Just distance. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. When the day arrived, I chose a navy blue suit. It reminded me of the dress I'd worn to Daniel's graduation years earlier. Only this time, I wasn't sitting in the audience watching someone else's achievement. I was walking into a boardroom because of my own. The conference room overlooked downtown Chicago. Sunlight reflected off the glass skyscrapers as members of my executive team organized their presentation materials. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door opened. Daniel walked in first. He was older. The confidence he once carried so effortlessly now seemed forced. There were faint lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He glanced toward the head of the table. Then he saw me. His entire body stopped moving. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. "Olivia?" His voice was barely above a whisper. I smiled politely. "Good morning, Dr. Carter." The room fell silent. None of the other executives understood the history unfolding in front of him. Daniel looked around the room, then back at me. "You're the CEO?" "Yes." I had no idea. "I imagine you didn't." The meeting began. For the next 40 minutes, we discussed staffing projections, contract terms, compliance requirements, and long-term workforce planning. I spoke with confidence. Answered every question. Presented every solution. Daniel hardly said a word. He kept looking at me the way people look at a city they no longer recognize. After the others left for a short break, we found ourselves alone. He finally spoke. "I've thought about you a lot." I nodded politely but said nothing. "I owe you an apology." "You do." I was arrogant. "Yes. I convinced myself I deserved better." He lowered his eyes. "I was wrong." The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply honest. "I've wanted to tell you that for years." I folded my hands on the table. "Thank you." He looked surprised. "That's all?" What else should there be? I don't know. He hesitated. I guess. I hoped we could talk. We are talking. No. I mean really talk. He took a slow breath. I've made a lot of mistakes. I know. I hurt the one person who never stopped believing in me. Yes. I don't expect forgiveness. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled, not with bitterness, but with peace. You once told me you deserved someone who matched the life you'd built. His shoulders sank. I remember. You were right about one thing. He looked up, hope briefly returning to his face. We don't belong in the same life anymore. The hope disappeared. Not because my words were cruel. Because they were true. I stood, extended my hand, and thanked him for meeting with us. He shook it quietly. The same hand I had once held through years of uncertainty now belonged to a stranger. As he reached the door, he turned back. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I answered with complete honesty. I know. Then I walked away. Not because I wanted the last word. But because I no longer needed one. People often imagine revenge as something loud. Public humiliation. Arguments. Tears. Someone losing everything. Life taught me something very different. The greatest revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's refusing to let them destroy you. For years after my divorce, I believed Daniel had stolen the best part of my life. I thought my 20s and early 30s had been wasted helping someone who never truly appreciated me. But time has a remarkable way of revealing the truth. Those years weren't wasted. They were my education. While Daniel learned medicine, I learned discipline. While he memorized anatomy, I mastered budgeting, leadership, negotiation, and resilience. While he became a surgeon, I became someone capable of building an entire company from the ground up. Today, my business supports hospitals across multiple states. We've helped thousands of healthcare professionals find meaningful careers and assisted medical centers during some of their most challenging staffing shortages. Every time I walk through one of the hospitals we partner with, I remember the exhausted woman who once served breakfast in a cafeteria before rushing to her second job. I wish I could hug that version of myself. I'd tell her to keep going. Not because Daniel was worth the sacrifice, but because she was. A year after our meeting, I learned that Daniel had accepted a position at another hospital in a different city. I genuinely wished him well. Not because he'd earned my kindness, but because carrying resentment had become too heavy, and I'd finally learned how to set it down. People sometimes ask whether I regret helping him through medical school. The answer surprises them. No. Because my generosity wasn't the mistake. His lack of gratitude was. If I had one message for anyone listening who's been betrayed, abandoned, or made to feel like they weren't enough, it's this. Never measure your worth by the way someone else chooses to value you. The people who use you often mistake your kindness for weakness. They think your loyalty means you'll always stay where they left you. They never imagine you'll rebuild. Until one day, they look up and realize the person they underestimated has become someone they can never reach again. For years, I believed I had sacrificed my future to build Daniel's. I couldn't have been more wrong. I was building the strength, resilience, and courage to create my own. And in the end, that became the one thing he could never take away from me. If Olivia's story reminded you that kindness is never weakness and that the best revenge is building a life no one can take away, then this story was for you. Thank you for spending your time with Revenge Stories with Rinsula. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next unforgettable revenge story. Every week, we bring you powerful stories of betrayal, karma, justice, second chances, and the incredible strength of people who refuse to let heartbreak define their future. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What was the exact moment Daniel lost Olivia forever? Was it the divorce papers, or was it the moment he forgot who helped him become a doctor? Share your opinion below. I read as many comments as I can. Until next time, remember this. Never underestimate the person who quietly sacrificed everything for you. One day, they may become the success story you never saw coming. Thanks for watching Revenge Stories with Rinsula. Stay strong, stay wise, and I'll see you in the next story.